If you're wondering how the policy that Southwest has applied to its customers of size is rolling out, the answer is not consistently, not fairly, and not well. I recently had a trip where I flew 6 times in 5 days. I had 2 connecting flights out of my home city, a connecting flight between 2 different cities, and 3 connecting flights on the way back. This was my first time flying since they changed the policy in January, and I honestly didn't know how it was going to go. The night before my flight, I was up reading people's stories on Reddit. Some people said they had the same experience they always had, and some people said it hadn't gone well. I got on my first flight, no problem. Nobody asked me anything, nobody said anything to me. I sit in one seat. I don't pay for the cheapest option. I always get a window seat, and I usually sit in an extra room seat. Now, as we all know, extra room on a commercial aircraft refers to extra leg room, not extra ass room. And there is no minimum width on a commercial air carrier's seat. Seats have gotten smaller over the years, and I have learned that seats are not consistent from aircraft to aircraft. I know that if I'm flying on a Canadian regional jet, a CRJ, I probably have to book 2 seats because they don't have a first class section, and I'm not going to fit in one. On a 737, however, on a 747, on a 737 MAX, on a 777, I can sit in one seat with one ticket and put the armrest down. My second leg of travel was between St. Louis and Little Rock. This was my shortest flight. It's like a 1-hour hop between those 2 cities. When I went to check in for my flight at Lambert, my gate agent immediately walked away from me without saying anything to my face, took my ID, and went and got her supervisor. Her supervisor came back and said, "You're going to have to buy a second seat." I told her I flew here on the same aircraft. I sat in my seat. I put my armrest down. She said, "It's an older aircraft. It doesn't matter. It's a new policy. It's consistent. There's no way around this. We have to get you a second seat." I was unhappy, but I said, "It is what it is. Sell me another seat." I paid $150 there at the gate to get a second seat. I sat in the middle of 12 empty seats on that flight. When I was flying out of Little Rock, I was understandably anxious about this process, not knowing how this policy was going to be applied to me, having seen that it was not consistent and that it was basically at the discretion of the person booking me in. I started thinking about that last interaction, and I realized that she had looked at my passenger history and said, "Well, you've used our customer size policy before," referring to how it used to work, where they would put you next to an empty seat for your comfort and for everybody else's. That means there's a note in my file as a passenger at Southwest where I have been a regular customer, where I do have a Rapid Rewards account. I used to have their credit card. I flew Southwest a lot because I liked it, because it was a reasonable alternative to having to buy a first class seat. If they have that information, that means they could have told me at the point of sale that I was going to have to buy a second seat. They don't do it at the point of sale because they know you have the option to stop the process and go book with another airline. Instead, they hold you up at the gate where your options are few, where your travel is imminent, where you're probably expected someplace, and you have no alternative. They do that on purpose to fluster and confuse you and to make sure that you're stuck with them. On my flight out of Little Rock, I sat at a gate that was not the gate my flight was departing from, because my gate was full. I was early enough that there was still a whole crowd of people for the flight before mine. I sat at a different gate, and a whole different gate agent approached me out of nowhere. I asked her nothing. I stood in no line, looked me over, and said, "What flight are you on?" And I told her. And she said, "You're probably going to have to buy a second seat." I said, "We'll see." And she walked away and started talking to the other gate agents about my body, about the likelihood that I would spill over my seat, about the likelihood that someone else would complain about me. Now, everybody says they fly all the time. Everybody says you're going to lose me as a customer, and that's a big deal. I do fly a lot. I'm an author. I go on tour. I do appearances all over the country. I realize that I'm not a daily commuter on an airline, but I do think it makes a difference when someone like me, who knows exactly how this works, who has researched different aircrafts to figure out how I can safely fly, when someone like me decides to never fly an airline again, which is what happened that day with Southwest. I have a rider in my contract that says if my publisher is flying me somewhere, that I don't fly on budget airlines. No Spirit, no Frontier, none of that garbage. Southwest is now on that list. I had 3 connections on the way home to my home airport, which is Albany. It's not big enough to get a direct flight almost anywhere. On each of those flights, I got weirdly side-eyed by the crew because they know that they have to enforce this policy, or they'll be expected to, and that the person they enforce it on is not going to have a good experience. If you're flying and you're fat, on Southwest, you're going to have something between an awkward and an utterly humiliating experience, and I urge you to take your money elsewhere. Southwest states in their policy, which is really hard to nail down, that if you end up having to buy a second seat and the flight isn't completely full, like mine with the 12 empty seats, that they'll refund you. I immediately filed for that refund. They wrote back to me and said they didn't owe me a refund because my original seat, I had paid the premium to get a window seat and an extra room seat. And when they booked me into 2 seats in the dead last row of the plane in the cheapest seats they have, that it wasn't the same ticket type, so it didn't count. But they were going to give me a refund this one time because they're keenly aware that I have other options when I book my flights. Folks, I will be taking one of those other options every single time now. I would rather pay twice as much to fly Delta, where they have not humiliated me at the gate and treated me like a bounty to be taken in by the most fatphobic gate agent they could possibly hire. If you're in my comments to tell me about the horror you endured having to sit next to a fat person on a plane, call your mother and tell it to her. If you're in my comments to tell me that I'm fat, don't worry. I have receipts on it. I know. Southwest Airlines made sure.